Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Derek Main and I review translated literature. So I took a couple week break, as I think a lot of people did, but I was really excited about the booktubers that didn't, because it gave me a lot of content to review over the holidays. But the kids were out of school, so we had kind of a long period actually from kind of the Friday before Christmas up until New Year's, where I was doing the stay-at-home dad thing a lot, of course, prepping for Christmas and all that. And I actually thought it was going to be a time where I was going to get to do a lot of reading, and I did the least amount all year. I think that it's just because I was kind of always needed for something. Like, I was in the mix of a social thing. We hosted, people here, and so I just didn't get a ton of time to sneak away, and I can start to feel that in my own anxiety. Like, I really need that time, even if it's like a lot of times I'll be on the couch with my wife, we'll both be reading, or even with kids. So it's not that I have to be alone, but I do like that time where I can kind of go into someone else's head that's not mine, and I'm kind of missing that. But I'm excited to get back to the reviews. Today we're going to review a book that I read quite some time ago, but I've been ready and prepared to review it for a while. And it is Vernon Subutex 2 by Virginie Despentes, translated from the French by Frank Wynne. And this is actually the British version, because the American version has not come out. Vernon Subutex 1 just came out in the fall. And so I'm trying to find the publisher here, because that would be a nice thing to do. And it is Maclehose Press Editions. So if you haven't watched my review of Vernon Subutex 1, I would encourage you to, but I'm not going to give away any spoilers for 1 or 2 while I review it. And I do think this will be a little bit of a shorter review because, well, 1, because it's the second part of a series, right? So you kind of can't get too deep into the plot stuff without necessarily spoiling 1. And I do think it's a series worth reading. But also, I kind of have a lukewarm review today, to be honest. So you know how excited I was to go get this. First, if you saw my, Vernon Subutex 1, it was right in my wheelhouse, being someone who used to be kind of in the music scene and played in punk bands and, toured, traveled, and kind of did all that. All my friends were in the scene, in my late teens and early 20s. So seeing that from the perspective in Paris was really, really cool, and I recognized a lot of the people that I knew kind of through the characters, and definitely recognized the ethos of the characters quite a bit. And they had this great MacGuffin right at the center of it, which is that this ex-scenester who used to own the record store has got in his possession these tapes from a dead rock star who used to be his friend, who got super huge. His name was Alex Bleach, and he recorded kind of I don't want to call it a last will and testament, but he recorded these videotapes that are sort of hinted at being like his final statements, even though he didn't necessarily know he was going to die. I think it's an overdose, and all this happens in the first page of the first, of the first book, and on the back cover as well. So it's not spoiling anything. But anyway, it's supposed to be this monumental thing, and everyone wants to get their hands on it. And Vernon either has it or knows where it is throughout book 1. And I called it a MacGuffin because in book 2, we actually get to view these tapes along with the characters who have been all chasing after them. And it's clear from that, in my opinion, that it kind of is a MacGuffin. It's more of a plot device than anything revelatory. And I think part of that was sort of hinted at. I mean, it wasn't about the tapes necessarily. But what bothered me a bit is the content of the tape ends up way too neatly tying together the characters, the disparate characters in the story. So it's just all a little too clever plot-wise for my taste. I think I probably said when I read 1 that I thought this would make a great miniseries, and it really does start to read like a TV show once we're in the second volume. And the content of the tapes is very much like a TV show or a movie, in that it's just a little too perfect for me. So that's kind of my first little, because now what's the search and what's the mystery, right? When we had that as an unknown, at least we were kind of propelling ourselves towards that. Well, now that that's a known, we're looking at the fallout from the tape. and we're going to see how these characters respond to that. And I'm assuming that's what 3 is primarily going to be about, although large part of 2 definitely it ends that way about that. And that's not as interesting to me. Actually, let me tie it into my bigger critique of the writing of the series, and in particular Vernon Subutex 2, because I think it ties in. She is very good at character writing. And what she does is she will introduce a new character, and almost always there's some really awful things about this character, or shady things, but also some redemptive qualities as well. You kind of get this whole person. And one thing I started to notice in 2 is that all of that character building and description was done by just telling us outright. So you'd start a new chapter, and the first 3 pages would be, this is how this person is. This person is like A, B, C, and D, and they're sort of like this, that, and that, and these are their foibles, these are their weaknesses, these are their strengths. We didn't get to see it develop through action. It's so cheesy to use that, like, show me, don't tell me, but I did think about that while I was reading it. There was some of that. There's a lot of telling us instead of us getting to see it through the way the characters behave. And in fact, sometimes I found that the characters behaved in ways that were contradictory to how they were described. And that is totally okay. And in fact, that's good, right? Because we want to see that people and characters are not, they're not beholden to our initial description or initial thought of them. And that's how people are in real life. But in this case, so much work is done building these characters up that, I don't know, I would have liked a little bit less just pages of describing how they were, and a little more like, all right, throw them into the action and let's see how they react, how they respond, how they engage in the community. So the reason I tied that into my first sort of complaint about the film thing is that it worked great as a device when we didn't know what it was. Once we knew what it was, and again, we just watched it with everyone else, so it was just kind of all unfurled to us, the book lost for me a lot of its momentum. And all of a sudden, I was really taken out of their world and felt that I was really in a piece of fiction. And that's such an odd complaint, right? But it just depends on what kind of book. And when you're reviewing books or talking about books, you have to take them at what they are, right? And so this is an episodic, serialized, 3-version story of Vernon Subutex and the characters around his life. And I find that too much of it is like the tape and like the description of the characters, where we're being told by the narrator, the author, everything that is happening is going to happen, but we're not getting a lot of like in the moment development and movement of the story. Like the story is moved in a very television way from point A to point B, without us necessarily buying into certain changes or to shifts in tone or behavior. And that is just not the kind of book I typically read. So I think that maybe there's certain elements. This isn't a fantasy book, but I don't read fantasy. Part of me while I was reading it was like, maybe this is kind of how some fantasy and sci-fi is, like where it's just really plot heavy and, there's not a ton of thematic stuff behind it. I know there isn't in sci-fi, and I'm not saying there isn't here either. I think you can see me kind of struggling to deal with my dislike of the book. I guess I will be as frank as I can. My dislike of number 2. You can tell how much I like number 1. I didn't wait for number 2 to come out in America. I contacted the British publisher and through a small distribution press got it sent over here. I paid a lot of money in shipping, and I was really excited about it. And this book really took the wind out of my sails with the series. It also made me even question 1, and if I was just too excited about the familiarity of the scenester stuff to really sort of properly rate the book, right? Or to properly put the book in its context or its place. One of the things that, without spoiling anything, that Vernon turns into in 2, and it starts at the very end of 1, but in 2 it is full blossom, is kind of a cultish leader. So he is not the focus of book 2 in terms of the narration. It doesn't follow him the way it does in book 1. So in book 2, what we're following is all these other characters as they congregate around Vernon Subutex. And he becomes a really mythical and mystical figure. You know, he's still homeless, but he is literally drawing crowds to hear him talk, you know, in the park, or hear him DJ in the bar. And there's something going on, you know, and even those characters that are cynical of it end up being drawn in. Here's the problem with that. The book doesn't earn any of that, in my opinion. It does not show us anything that Vernon does, has said, behaves, to make us believe that he has earned this kind of status and this cult of personality and this following and sort of fanaticism surrounding him. We are just plopped into it and just have to accept it, okay? And the issue with that is some of the most interesting aspects would be, well, how? Like, what is it, you know? And now, I guess 3 could be totally redemptive and go back to Vernon, and it'd be really cool if it was like this same time period and it just went through his perspective, and maybe we would see why. You know, I can't completely write it off since there is a whole nother book, and I think that book is done in French, although it has not been, not even in England has it been translated yet. So I'll have to wait until that is translated. And I'm not going to wait 3-4 years before it finally comes out in America. I probably will get it when it's out because, you know, I'm a sucker to finish things. But not having earned, in my opinion, that kind of clout and mystery and intrigue, it just seems really weird. You know, it's like almost this character we followed throughout the whole book 1 is now kind of a different character. And there is a lot more largesse and weight behind his words, but we don't really see any of his words that are that impactful, frankly. We don't really get much of him at all. We just, again, are told that this is how it is now. You know, this is who he is now. So instead, we end up following a few characters that are connected to what comes out on the tapes. We get our first true villain. I think I said in book 1 that almost all of our characters have some kind of awful stuff connected with them, but then they're also redemptive and good. Now we have our first, at least by the end of book 2, fully villain. And the book has kind of taken a turn towards more of an action novel, frankly. You know, I know it seems oxymoronic or something that I would say that when I talk about all the character stuff and how there's not enough stuff happening. There is stuff happening. It's just, it's just kind of popcorn action movie type stuff, honestly. And it doesn't connect with the tone and tenor of the first book or really the second. Like, it just kind of like stuff explodes, you know, and I don't know. It wasn't for me. It just was not my thing. You know, I went back and started reading some folks' thoughts on it, and people love this, and I can kind of see it. You know, I can kind of see it. Maybe it's just so different from what I normally read, or I don't know. It fell off for me. It didn't work. I think the writer is really good. I think that there is nothing negative that I want to say about the writing. I mean, the quality and stuff is very high. It's the choices, right? And it's the structure that just don't work for me. So that's my review of Despentes Vernon Subutex 2. Quickly, thematically, I think I talked in 1 about how it was interesting to see the Generation X version of this because I am that next generation younger. So being 37, turning 38 this year, I think technically I might be in the first year of millennial, although I really don't identify much as that. I think not having a computer in high school is like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like I'm a millennial. But it is interesting to see that their villains and their evil of Generation X is still kind of the man and that corporate music industry and corporate film industry and stuff. That was interesting because that stuff has changed so much now. I mean, now when it comes to artists and creators, they are, when I was coming up, DIY was big, right? So like making your own zines, trying to put out your own records, putting out your own shows. So what had happened was the generation kind of after Generation X, when it came to the music scene, it seems like really came on and we're like, all right, we're going to take this back. We're going to take the means of production back for our art so that we're not beholden to the villainous kind of corporate overlord stuff, right? And so there was less of a focus on the negativity of that, corporate system and structure because you could operate outside of it. Well, now it is swung so far the other way where artists and creators actually have to market themselves, put themselves out there, do all of their work, all of their labor in addition to the art that they create. And so now the job is about getting noticed, and that becomes very, very difficult in this world, right? I mean, so now you don't even need the music industry or the film industry or whatever. You can do it all yourselves, but at the same time, that means that it's very difficult to sort of get seen and have your art actually find an audience, and all that work is on you. Okay, so for some reason my QuickTime player just stops recording. It gives me no reason, and of course when I Google it, I'm completely lost. Anyway, that was interesting to see the differences between the generations and how their villains would be structured. This is such a Gen X book and series that is kind of cool to think about. For my next review, I read this on Christmas Eve because it takes place on Christmas Eve. Professor Anderson's Night by Dag Solstad. This is from New Directions. I knew nothing about the author or the work. I just saw it in a bookstore that had only 2 or 3 things when it came to translated fiction, and I wanted to pick something up, and this happened to be something I hadn't read on Christmas Eve, and that will be my next review. So until next time, take care, folks.